Are you ready to officially get started with our interview?
I am.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Leah Roseland, the VP of Community Impact with the United Way of Douglas County, and I am here with my dear friend, Allan Bunch, the Vice President of Communication and Development from the Kansas Suicide Prevention HQ, which I will probably forever call headquarters. Allan, welcome and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Trust me that you are not alone in that. Even our own staff, we're checking each other. Anytime someone says headquarters, I'm sorry, what?
Right.
It makes it easier just to colloquially refer to it as HQ.
HQ, okay.
Yes.
Well, I grew up in Lawrence. You know, I'm a townie and remember calling headquarters crisis line when I was in junior high, coming out as a little queer kid, wanting to know if there were other people like me. And at that time, it was located right across from my school at Central Junior High. And I, like many Lawrencians, have just a real fondness for Kansas Suicide Prevention HQ. And it is something that's so uniquely Lawrence, although you have expanded. So tell us about why the name change and how you all have changed your work.
You are absolutely correct. It is very unique to Lawrence. In fact, even when we compare ourselves to crisis centers across the country, there's not a single one that is even close to our model. I think that one of the wonderful things about our organization when comparing it to other crisis centers and other suicide prevention organizations is how deeply volunteer driven we are. All but 2 of our counselors are volunteers. And the 2 that are actually paid are the most kind and generous, wonderful people who work the midnight to 8 a.m. And oftentimes with a volunteer shift partner. That tends to be a high volume time. And so when you're that deeply focused on your volunteers, it's hard to get that time frame covered. But most of the crisis centers are the closest that I've ever seen to us are 50-50 volunteers and paid staff, which I think makes a huge difference for the people who call. I think it's a real big difference in getting to talk to somebody who's there because they want to. Nothing against paid people. I mean, I love my job. I still get paid for it. But I think for many people doing this very sensitive work, burnout is a real thing. And being a volunteer, your livelihood does not depend on it. So you are able to say, I need a mental health break. I need a little time out. I will touch base with you next week and let you know how I'm feeling. But I think that greatly improves the quality of the service when someone is reaching out for help in potentially a very dark time in their lives. But considering the name change, you notice that we held on to the HQ. It was really difficult in considering we have a lot of callers who reach us who aren't familiar with headquarters, and their first response is, headquarters of what? And so that sort of having a name that says what you are is helpful because you're not losing that split second of concentration. You're calling for help, and the first thought of your mind is, where have I just called? So we wanted to pay homage to our beginnings, our 50-year history that started as just headquarters. And then in the mid-'80s, we expanded with an 800 number. Back in the days, long distance. So people from Baldwin could call and we could truly be, Baldwin and Eudora was long distance at the time. So people from all over Douglas County could be served. And then in the early 2Ks, we joined what was then known as Lifeline, which was a national network of crisis centers focusing on suicide prevention. And that later became the groundwork of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is, I believe we're up to 163 centers across the country. So when somebody is calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, they're not calling some shiny building in Manhattan or LA or even Chicago. They're calling their own local crisis center. But the beauty of this network is that if for any reason we're experiencing a high call volume and we can't answer the call, we use the word rolls to another crisis center, ensuring a very high answer rate.
That's great. So do you all take all the calls for Kansas?
We do. We answer all Kansas area codes. So if you have a Kansas area code outside of one of the Wichita specific exchanges, your call is going to come to headquarters. Excuse me. See, I did it. KSPHQ first.
I don't feel so bad.
Wichita does fund their own crisis center, but we are also their rollover center. So if they are unable to answer, that their call can still stay inside Kansas. So in thinking about the new name, Kansas Suicide Prevention HQ, we really wanted the end user to know exactly what we were about. We wanted our donors to know exactly what we were about. We still ask you to call for any reason. It doesn't have to be suicide prevention related. One of our board members and I had a conversation. I can't tell you at what point just basic human kindness becomes suicide prevention. So no matter what you're dealing with, we're here for you.
Oh, God damn it. I wish I could have a conversation without tearing up. That's beautiful. Thank you. So before we continue on with the conversation, I want to ask a very basic question, or maybe it's not so basic. What is suicide?
The one thing that I want people to most understand about suicide is that most people who consider suicide don't actually want to die. Suicide is much more about losing hope. It's much more about an individual being in deep, deep, deep emotional pain and not knowing what to do with it. You hear it a lot more, manifesting it in some of the warning signs of no one would miss me if I'm gone. We know that less than half of all suicides have a pre-diagnosed mental health condition. A lot of times it has to do with economic problems, unemployment, or just financial hardship of people being in so much pain and not knowing how they can possibly crawl back out. So the thing that I want people to most understand about suicide is that we know that through crisis intervention and professional counseling, it can be prevented. And hopefully what we are at HQ is a sounding board for people to help work out their problems, having a kind voice just to listen and help you come to a new conclusion and to offer community resources to help you with some of the underlying problems.
How many calls do you get on average, and how big of a problem is suicide in our community?
On average, the number of calls we receive and the number of calls we answer are a little bit different. Unfortunately, beauty of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is that if we can't answer it, it rolls. So we answer somewhere in the neighborhood of 21,000 contacts a year. Last year it was 24,140 contacts.
Wow.
So, and that's not only via phone, but that's also through online chat. Before COVID hit, we also offered walk-in services, and we also provide longer term counseling for people who are waiting to get into other services, or maybe are trying out therapy for the first time. It can be a great stopgap to be able to come and see somebody once a week while you're waiting to get into services at a mental health center or the VA or something like that. As for how many, I guess, right now the national rate of suicide is about 14.2 per 100,000, which is increasing, unfortunately, every year. In Douglas County, we're a little higher than that, 15.6 per 100,000, which means in the state of Kansas, a little over 550 people died of suicide last year. That means that somebody in our state, one of our neighbors, dies every 15 hours of suicide. If our number was one person a year, that's still too many.
It can be so scary when you have a friend or family member who is saying some of those things that you mentioned earlier, talking about feeling helpless or worthless. If you have a friend or loved one that is saying some of those sort of red flags or that you're worried for, what should you do to help a friend that you're concerned about?
That is the absolute perfect question, because it's one I love answering. Ask very directly. Don't be around the bush. Ask very directly. Are you thinking about suicide, or are you thinking about killing yourself? One of the examples that we give in some of our trainings is that if you ask somebody, are you thinking about doing something stupid? Of course they're going to say no, because if they have decided to kill themselves, that is a very sane decision to them. That is what they have decided to do. Of course, it's not stupid. So by asking the question very directly, you're doing a couple of things. It is not an unsafe question to ask, despite old myths, but you are identifying yourself as a safe person to talk to, and you are giving them a question that they can safely respond yes to. And you are opening yourself up to talk about the subject. If the response is yes, just listen. What you and I may think is a huge personal issue, somebody else might not. So it's important to listen to them, try to empathize with what they're telling you, and not, as we as humans like to do, fix things. Oh, it'll be better tomorrow. Oh, you just hang in there. That's not helpful to somebody who has been feeling like this through several tomorrows. So it's important to let them feel heard and feel understood.
Thank you for saying that. I didn't realize that it was appropriate just to ask straight out. I was also under the misassumption that it might scare somebody off from talking to you more. If somebody does say, yeah, it's something I've thought about, other than providing support and encouragement, is there ever a time that you would recommend taking it a step further and intervening in terms of a family member calling Suicide Prevention HQ or any other sort of, if somebody's really scared of?
I'll answer this in two different ways. If you are concerned about somebody else and just don't feel as though you are the right person, maybe this is something that makes you uncomfortable because you have your own lived experience, and for your own mental health and your own safety, you're not sure you should engage in this, then I think so. I think it's okay to call and say, I have a friend and I don't know what to do. First off, this is always going to be an awkward conversation. I think acknowledging it with the person and saying, look, I want to talk to you about this. I love you and you're important to me. I think I'm going to fumble this up, but I'm here for you. And at some point, if you want to say, can we call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline together, then that's a completely appropriate thing to do. I think that once you get into supporting the person down the road, for many people, again, this is something that's as unique as we are as individuals. I think for many people, it would feel like a betrayal of their trust to go tell somebody else that you don't think they're safe. But I think that being concerned and wanting other people to know is okay. So that's something between you and the person that you're helping to say, hey, I think that we should tell, if not especially with kids, your parent about it. Maybe you have an aunt, maybe you have an older sibling, but putting it on somebody's radar with that person's consent and supporting your friend through doing it, going with them and saying, I stand with you in solidarity to have this conversation.
Thank you. Two final questions. So I read a few articles over the course of the COVID pandemic that have talked about the increased rate of suicide or fears that suicide will increase as a result of COVID. Have you seen an increase in calls or in suicide? What do you think about that?
We have seen a large increase in the number of calls coming through. Most people are calling, well, I say this, we're still gathering data. Of course, when somebody calls, gathering data is not our primary mission, helping them is, but we are able to glean a few things along the way. So what we are seeing right now is definitely an increase in volume. I don't think that we are quite seeing an increase of suicide attempts. But yes, probably an increase on suicidal ideation, I guess. And that is simply because I think a lot of people lost their support systems. The support systems that you and I have because we walk into our office, that we have because we see our family on a more regular basis. A lot of those are gone. So it's really important to check in with friends, especially if you know that they have a history of any type of mental issue or illness, or if they've ever expressed feelings of isolation before. I think it's really important to reach out and keep that line of dialogue open. To answer the second half of your question, I guess, we do believe that we will see an increase in the suicide rate, but more to do with the economy. I think that unemployment is a huge, I can't tell you where I read it the other day, but just the other day I read an article. There was a direct correlation between unemployment and the suicide rate. So I think keeping an eye out for warning signs and knowing who might be at risk, knowing the basics of how to recognize somebody who might need to get some help is paramount.
Oh my gosh. I am so angry right now because
This is why I do so well at parties.
I know, right? Like, I didn't know that connection, and I don't know why I've never read that before. Because of course it makes total sense, and it makes me so mad. It makes me so mad that, you know, poverty is linked to just about every negative indicator in life. Oh,
But
gosh.
actually, well, so I do want to differentiate financial hardship from poverty in this.
So it's not necessarily poverty.
Well, this is a much longer discussion, but of those living in poverty, we actually see a lower suicide rate. It's when financial situations change that we see a difference in the rate of suicide.
Interesting. So like linked to that sense of hopelessness, or that your life is spinning out of control, or
Right.
uncertainty for the future.
Right.
Wow. Yeah. And we don't really know what, talking about ambiguity earlier, we don't really know what's going to happen. So, yeah.
So that's why just exercise basic human kindness. That goes a long way. Something I referenced before. There's a 2003, it's a multiple of 6, it might be 6, 2003 or 2006 article from the New Yorker called Jumpers. It's still online. If anybody wants to look it up, I'll warn you that it is a little graphic, and know what you're getting into before you read this, but it cites the story of a woman who actually left a note and went to die by suicide by jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge. And in the note, it said, if one person smiles at me, that I can't tell you at what point it becomes suicide prevention. Who knew that smiling at a stranger on the street was suicide prevention? So I think that we just need to be kind. We need to exercise that basic human kindness to our fellow humans and smile at people on the street, smile at people in the grocery store, be nice to others. I think all of that just goes a long way to, personally, I would argue, fixes all the world's problems. But in this role, I from all of the research and reading that I do on the topic, there's just no way that I think it doesn't help.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is, show compassion to everyone you meet, because you never know what wars they have going on inside where the flesh meets the bone. And that is so true. We don't know each other's struggles, and yeah.
You never know what somebody else is experiencing, and you don't know the impact of that on them, especially when we talk about teenage suicides. Those just are the most heart-wrenching, because now in hindsight as adults, we know how the way we feeling changed growing up. But we were all teenagers, and we can all remember that one thing that was the absolute end of the world. Maybe it was a test, maybe it was the end of a relationship that you lived in dread, going to school every day, that you were just sort of waiting for the next shoe to drop. Or if it was a grade or something, you just lived in terror until you finally got it off your chest and told your parents that you were flunking chemistry, But then to your parents, if you then later learned that your kid was considering suicide because they got a D, well, that's nothing. Okay, so you get your grade up. Like,
Right.
and that's the way we look at it as adults. And I think that's why teenagers and kids are just so heart-wrenching, to know that they were experiencing those emotions in response to something that they would look back in the future as so trivial.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Ellen. And I can't believe I didn't have it as one of our questions. But one of the ways that the United Way supports Kansas Suicide HQ is peer suicide intervention in our local schools. So can you tell us about that program and the work that you're doing in schools and the influence that peers can have on each other?
I can answer some of those questions. Of course, our program staff are the ones that are actually the boots on the ground. I know that once we started this program and started just talking to educators, not just teachers, but all educators, we realized that we needed to do some education with them before we actually started getting directly to the students. It's like anything else. You have to build the foundation before you get to the windows. So we worked with them to help them learn how to support their students. And when a teenager did come to them or display a warning sign of suicide, that they would be comfortable moving forward with that student and knowing how they could handle a situation. So we actually produced some different forms of material. We've got one that is for educators that gives them more specific warning signs of students. We also want educators to be looking out for their coworkers, other people with whom they work, who might be experiencing emotional problems or even considering suicide themselves. Then we also made another piece directly for students that helps you understand how to support a friend when it's appropriate to talk to an adult. And then we made one for the parents too, so they could be aware of warning signs. They could not only be aware of what the kid was learning in school, but also be prepared to support them when they come home at the end of the day.
That's great. Yeah, I certainly remember as a teenager, I did not want to talk to any adults about any of my problems.
And that's super valid. I think when I speak to parents, one of the things that I try to convey to them is that you might not be the person. I just use the phrase "the person."
Yeah.
I have been through my job, and of course, holding this position, I am more publicly known to among my friends as someone who they can turn to for help. So I have been in a situation several times where I was called, if you will, to provide direct support to somebody that I know. It's scary, but you call on what you've learned over the years, and everything starts playing in your head. These are the steps I'm going to take to clarify what we're talking about. Ask directly, are you thinking about suicide? And start on a safety plan with the person. I just talked myself into a loop and don't remember what the question was.
I think at this point we're just chatting.
No, I know what it was. Something that I like to convey to parents is that when talking to your kid, you might not be their person. You might not be the person that they are most comfortable talking to. And I think that at some point there was a sort of societal beat it into your head that parents were the ones that needed to provide everything for their kids. When it comes to mental health and emotional well-being, your kid might not want to talk to you all the time. So as part of their safety planning, who would you go to if you were thinking about killing yourself? Who would you want to talk to? And then pre-identifying that individual and letting that individual know that, hey, if Susie is thinking about hurting herself, she's going to come talk to you. Is that okay? The safety planning is something that I hope everybody does. I guess that's an improvement I need to make to our new website. There was so much information on the old websites that I'm still integrating them over, but we did have a guide to safety planning on the website. So maybe that should be my next newsletter. Well, not the next one, July. Maybe safety planning will be the July newsletter from KSPHQ.
I think that would be incredibly helpful. I've never worked in suicide prevention, so I didn't even realize that there were safety plans for if somebody disclosed that they were considering suicide, or you're worried about somebody, or if you're worried about yourself, perhaps.
Right. And I think that we have contingency plans for everything in our lives. If we're having a bad day, who are we going to talk to? If if we can't pay our bills, what are we going to do? I think that's just kind of part of adulting. And with kids, they don't have those contingency plans so much. And I think with adults that especially when it comes to mental health, it's considered such a sign of weakness. And it's not. I don't know if you've ever been to therapy, but therapy is a lot of work. It takes a strong person to go to therapy. And when you are calling a place like HQ, when you're calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, it takes guts. It takes guts to say, I am feeling the way I'm feeling, but I know I need to talk to somebody about it.
And thank you for naming that it's actually a sign of great courage and bravery to reach out and get the help you need and deserve.
I think, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So if somebody is interested in donating or volunteering or getting involved in other ways, how can you use people? How can people get involved?
Lots of ways. I would invite anyone to go to KSPHQ.org. K is in Kansas, S is in suicide, P is in prevention, HQ is in the formerly known headquarters.org. There we have a tab that is Get Involved. And even if it's just signing up to receive our newsletter and learn a little bit more, we try to keep our newsletters resource-based so that you can always learn a little something new every time. We also try to provide some direct support through our newsletters. Of course, we're going to get into a little, look at what we did this month, because we do have donors who receive our newsletters, and we want to show them that we're not just having ice cream parties. But when I took my position here and I thought about restarting our newsletter, I really wanted it to be not just a piece of fluff, but something that someone could read, learn something, and feel inspired to go out and do something about it. So you can sign up for our newsletter. If you're interested in volunteering, we do 3 volunteer training sessions a year. Volunteering at HQ is a little bit more involved than other organizations. Our volunteers go through about 100 hours of training before getting on the phone, but it is truly incredible. I know I'm partial, but it is truly incredible training that teaches someone to listen. At the absolute heart, it's about listening. So I was talking to our training coordinator yesterday, who went through our training in 2013, maybe. I won't name names, but he previously worked at another mental health care facility, and he recognized the people who were HQ volunteers just because the skills that they learned will benefit them the rest of their lives. And our volunteers come from all walks of life and take that information and reach an incredible number of people. We have volunteers that commute in from the KC metro area. We have some from Topeka.
Oh my gosh.
Who make the drive every week to give of their time. It's absolutely incredible to me that amount of love exists in so many people. And of course, donations are always welcome. I mean, we're not all volunteers, and the building doesn't pay for itself. And the marketing campaigns that we put out to reach other people and to let them learn how to support others aren't free. Unfortunately, people, radio stations and social media, that they all want to get paid. And in direct support of our volunteer training program. Many years ago, volunteers were charged to go through our training, and today we don't do that anymore.
Good. Oh,
So
I'm
it
so
costs,
happy to hear that.
I mean, it's a little counterproductive to charge somebody to then volunteer their time, but
Right.
That's me. It could cost for that 100 hours of training and materials and some evidence-based programs and trainings that we actually have to pay other people to do. We work that out to be about $500 per volunteer, which sounds a little costly to train a volunteer, but once you consider that volunteer's in-kind gift, which we ask for 300-hour commitment, will be about $7,400 of in-kind time spent. That's like a 391% return on investment. Like, who doesn't want that?
Right.
Again, partial, but I think it's worth it.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If there's any, if people want to learn more, give us your website again.
KSPHQ.org.
Thank you, Allan. All right. So do you have time to grab a virtual cocktail with me?
Absolutely.
Yay!
Is Daniel editing this?
He is.
Hi, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Well, I'm going to go get a cocktail. Is it okay if I just put us on pause and go get a drink and come back?
Yeah, I'm going to switch you over to my iPad.
Oh, I might switch to my phone too. That's a good idea. Okay, I'll try. We'll try this fancy technology.
Look at this ridiculous setup I have.
Oh,
all of my lights.
You have an official studio set up. Of course you do.
That's how we roll.
Yes. Did you get those?
I've got my little corner here, and out this window. I've got the bird feeder and the bird bath. And
Oh,
Easter Sunday, I was standing at my desk doing some work, and I discovered that I had a little bunny nest out there. So that was fun.
oh my gosh, little bunny.
Oh, here we go.
Oh my God.
Say hi to the Zooms.
Hi, baby. Oh my God, look at that mouse.
She loves being on the Zooms.
Is it your time for a meeting? What's her name?
Daisy.
Daisy. Oh my God, you are so. Oh, you. She is so adorable. Oh my God, I love her like half black, half white face and the little freckles. Oh, it's
Just always.
so cute. Here, you want to say hi, Thebe?
Oh, hi. Hello.
I know. Hello.
She is totally doing a. I'm not looking.
I know. She's like, don't make me do it. Don't do it. Don't do it. Oh. All right, friends. Well, thank you for the time. I look forward to seeing you soon.
You too.
Love you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.